Wow, I was going to ask you all to settle down, but you're ready, aren't you? Well, now you know the drill. Silence your cell phones and other devices. My name is Sandra Clausen. I'm the forum chair and moderator, and I'm also chair of a Democratic National Affairs Committee. I'd like to welcome you to this policy forum entitled Rebooting Our Policy Agenda to Reclaim the American Dream. And I want to thank the forum co-sponsors, including the Alexandria, Manassas, and Manassas Park Democratic Committees, Democratic Asian Americans of Virginia, Democratic Latino Organization of Virginia, George Mason University College Democrats, AFL-CIO Virginia, SEIU Virginia 512, Progressive Democrats of America Virginia, People Demanding Action Virginia, No Vote to Amend, New Virginia Majority, and the Brigades. This is an enthusiastic crowd. This event is entirely the result of in-kind donations and volunteer efforts, for which I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge and express appreciation. Co-sponsor AFL-CIO Virginia's President Doris Krause-Mays donated our union-produced event signs, and I think Doris is in the audience somewhere. There she is. The creative art and graphics for our signs were contributed by designer John Fawcett, and the political cartoons donated by Arizona Daily Star editorial cartoonist David Fitzsimmons. Jim Southworth, with the assistance of colleague Rafael Arancibia, are managing our technology, and they will produce a YouTube video of this event. And I particularly want to extend my sincere thanks to our nearly 40-member planning team of co-sponsor representatives, National Affairs Committee members, and other Northern Virginia Democrats and volunteers. And finally, we are grateful to Arlington Delegate Patrick Hope for reserving this venue in his district on our behalf. And to the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association for generously donating their facilities to us. One more round of applause for all of them. Okay. And I think we have, I am aware that we have a number of Virginia elected officials who've joined us. I think Arlington County Board Member Libby Garvey is here. Where's Libby? Raise your hand somewhere there. And Delegate Patrick Hope is here. And I think Delegate Mark Simon is here somewhere. There he is, yes. Thank you all for attending and recognize the importance of the topic for your constituents. Now, before moving on to the program, a few administrative details. We're structured so our speakers will give opening remarks, and then we'll go into Q&A. And so please hold all of your comments until we get through their presentations. Also, I've been told by the building that if you parked in the garage, don't throw away the original ticket to use your validation. They were sure I had to tell you this. Okay, now to the program. The purpose of this evening's forum is to discuss and advance the formation of a progressive policy agenda that benefits all Americans, not just the powerful and privileged. In recent years, poll after poll reveals that the majority of ordinary Americans, we mainstreamers, strongly disapprove of what we see happening to our government. We perceive that political campaigns and the policy-making process are increasingly dominated by elite donors and lobbyists. And we know all too well that the resulting policies have unfairly benefited big money and special interests to the detriment of the rest of us. Especially in the decades since the Powell Memorandum and the so-called Reagan Revolution, economic, social, and political power has been wrested from the majority and given into the hands of the financial and corporate elites. A 2014 study by Professors Martin Gillens and Benjamin Page of Princeton and Northwestern University reveals that on many key issues, government policies rarely align with the preferences of the majority of Americans. Average Americans were found to have a statistically zero effect on policymaking, and the wishes of economic and corporate elites were shown to be determinative. The researchers succinctly concluded, when a majority of citizens disagrees with the economic elites, the majority generally loses. Similarly, such leading economists as Paul Krugman, Joseph Stiglitz, and Robert Reich all admonish that the financial and corporate elites have captured the political process and shaped policies that foster flagrant income inequality, wealth disparity, and a predatory system that ignores the needs of everyday working Americans. Given this corruption of the democratic process and the harsh injustices that have ensued, it's not surprising that many of us are coming together to demand significant change, and now. Recently, Move On and Democracy for America wrote for Politico, the surging progressive spirit of the 2016 Democratic field and electorate are all tremors foretelling a much deeper tectonic shift in American politics. We're due for a profound political reckoning, and that restores our founders' dream of government by and for the people. We agree. It's time for a new era of systemic institutional change. And it is out of this conviction that we invited tonight's speakers to outline a set of progressive policy proposals that would constitute a comprehensive policy agenda reboot, with the goal of reclaiming the American dream for all by realigning legislative priorities to benefit all. As members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus dedicated to promoting a fair progressive policy agenda for all Americans, Senator Sanders, a CPC co-founder, and Congressman Beyer, the representative from one of the nation's most progressive congressional districts, are speakers in a unique position of expertise and political support to articulate such bold legislative priorities. Congressman Don Beyer is serving his first term as the U.S. Representative from Virginia's 8th District and as a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. We are in his district now, as you know. He serves on the Joint Economic Committee, the House Committee on Natural Resources, and is ranking member on the Oversight Subcommittee to the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. Representative Beyer was the Lieutenant Governor of Virginia from 1990 to 98, was ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein under President Obama. President Beyer's signature work as Lieutenant Governor included advocacy for Virginians with disabilities and ensuring protections for Virginia's most vulnerable populations as the Commonwealth reformed its welfare system in the mid-1990s. After leaving office, Representative Beyer was a decade-long board member of both the DC Campaign to Prevent Teen Pregnancy and Jobs for Virginia Graduates, a highly successful high school dropout prevention program. As ambassador, he was integral to the U.S. Department of Justice efforts to halt the abuses of Swiss bank secrecy by wealthy Americans. And he authorized a carbon footprint assessment of the embassy, a first for a U.S. embassy. And then the Beyers reduced that footprint by 40% during their tenure. His legislative efforts so far in his 6 months in office include co-sponsorship of paid parental leave for federal employees, an increase in the minimum wage, a bill to create carbon tax toward abatement of climate change, and legislation to tighten restrictions on gun sales to people with a criminal record. It is my distinct privilege to introduce and invite to the podium Congressman Don Beyer.
Buenas noches, bonsoir, guten Abend, good evening. thank you all for coming out tonight just to hear me speak. Seriously, thank you for inviting me to be part of this spirited discussion. It's a night for the progressive movement and moment, and I'm just so proud and happy to be here. I always wanted to be an Enlightenment candidate, and the Enlightenment's been struggling now for 500 or 600 years to overcome the forces of darkness, the forces of conservatism, and it's very much alive here tonight. And I love my new job, so thank you very much. And I've told some of you before that I've had many leadership positions in my life, from running the family business to being president of the Senate and overseas as ambassador. And now I'm one of 435 in the super minority. And it's still the best job I've ever had. Because it's important and it's meaningful, and every day we get to fight the good fight, try to take America forward, and speak the truth to power, and thank you. By the way, I saw Margot last night, and she said, Don, if pro is the opposite of con, then what's the opposite of progress? One lame joke per night. So, look, I'm really honored to be here with Senator Bernie Sanders. This is the first time I've ever met the legendary political leader from Vermont. But I've been following him for years and years and years. I lived in Pownell, Vermont as a young man. My son lived in Rutland, Vermont for a long time. And I spent much time in Burlington as Howard Dean's treasurer in 2003 and 2004. And now I'm here in Arlington with Senator Sanders, who's been shaking up Vermont and national politics for more than 30 years. I love reading about you. I am so impressed with all the enthusiasm you're generating across the country tonight. And I agree with you on so many issues. My pal Sandra Clausen wrote me, and I quote, "The purpose of this forum is for you and Senator Sanders to illuminate and propose a comprehensive and progressive tax, education, trade, labor, macroeconomic, financial regulations, science-based, civil rights and liberties, foreign and war policy reboot that will reclaim the American dream by returning economic, social, and political power to we the people." Wow. Well, I'm glad Bernie's here. But let me try. I do want to offer my humble perspective on what it means to be a progressive today. And please forgive me if I use Hegel's structure: thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So number one, thesis. We are winning. History does have a direction. On virtually every subject you can imagine, we have moved and are moving in the right direction. 88% of Americans have health insurance. Before World War II, almost no one had health insurance. Healthcare is the best in human history. Marriage equality is now the law of the nation. Women dominate law schools, med schools, and more than half of all undergraduate college positions. If African Americans were their own nation, they'd be the 10th wealthiest nation on the planet. And we have twice elected an African American president who has twice won in Virginia, the home of massive resistance in both capitals of the Confederacy. Marijuana has been decriminalized in Washington, Colorado, and the District of Columbia. Since 2007, we have lifted 43,000 people per day worldwide above the $2 per day minimum subsistence line. Fewer human beings, as a percentage of the whole, will go to bed hungry tonight, fewer than at any time in human history. There were perhaps 10 democracies in 1944. And today there are 75, according to the Democracy Index. Children have rights. Animals have rights. U.S. literacy is 99%. We have Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. The Clean Air Act has made our air much cleaner. The Clean Water Act has revolutionized our rivers and streams. The EPA has changed everything we breathe and touch. We live twice as long as we did 100 years ago, 4 times longer than we did in the 14th century. DDT, lead, asbestos, and many other hazards have been banned. From the Consumer Product Safety Division, to the FDA, to OSHA, to the SEC, we are protected and advocated for in most of our lives. In science, we explore the planets and stars, fundamental particles, relativity, quantum mechanics, the very nature of the universe. Our knowledge increases exponentially with every breath we take. I could go on much longer, but remember, it was William Buckley who, upon founding the arch-conservative National Review, wrote, "It stands to thwart history yelling stop." This is the nature of conservatism, to stand to thwart history yelling stop, to resist change, to preserve the status quo, to yearn for the incorrectly imagined good old days, and always to lose, because you cannot stop the progress of history. History has a direction. The tyrant always dies. At long last, the slaves are always free. We have discovered evolution and must now guide it actively. We are the masters of our destiny, for better and not for worse. Alpha and Omega. All that we have accomplished is proof that history moves inevitably and relentlessly forward. Okay, number 2, antithesis. I am so wrong. We are losing. Oh my God, what a mess. And don't be depressed, but I'm going to tell you at least part of the mess. ISIS, 30,000 gun deaths last year, and more opioid deaths than gun deaths. Too little progress on climate change, 16 million American children in poverty, obesity, the Koch brothers, Sheldon Adelson, and a presidency for sale. Russia and the Ukraine, Greece, Syria, Yemen, growing unfair income inequality. The 6th extinction, this one man-made. Extremist violence around the world. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Debris in space. Plummeting biodiversity. Factory farms, puppy mills. More than 2 million Americans in prison. 3,000 death row inmates. 42% of Americans don't accept that evolution is real. 25% of 9th graders will not graduate from high school on time. More than $1 trillion in college debt. It's enough to discourage a person. Even when we win, we lose. We passed the Affordable Care Act, but we did it without a single Republican vote, and the House has already voted to repeal it 60 times. We passed the Voting Rights Act. In the southern state after southern state, the other guys packed as many African Americans into one district so that it maximized the number of white seats. We authorized the expansion of Medicaid, paid for by the federal government in 22 states, including Virginia, refused to accept the funds, leaving more than 4 million eligible folks without health care. Every victory holds the seeds of the next failure. Despair. Number 3, synthesis. We are not allowed to despair. Okay, there is no progressive utopia. We're never going to get to the end. Of course, every time we win, we're going to lose a little. Someone wrote that the great lesson of the 20th century is that utopian rigidity always leads to mass murder. But on balance, we are winning. Despite all the tragedy, sadness, unfairness, cruelty, unkindness, evil, and unpredictability in this world, we are still way ahead of where we were yesterday. You know, this is the central dilemma of all religions, right? Theodicy. How can God be all-powerful and all-loving, and there still be so much evil elsewhere? Montaigne wrote that the most certain sign of wisdom is cheerfulness. For us then, with the knowledge that we have made incredible progress in every aspect of life, and the harsh reality that for far too many, in every corner of the planet, life is still solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. What do we do? Work, hope, love, inspire. The world works by invitation. Whatever we devote our attention to in our lives grows and changes. Here's what we cheerfully do. We dedicate our lives to racial healing. We paid past paid family medical leave, including maternity and paternity leave. We commit ourselves to full employment. We lift those 16 million kids out of poverty. We close the income inequality gap and start with new overtime rules, a $15 minimum wage, a financial transactions tax, and tax preferences for creators, double the earned income tax credit, and make sure every American who wants a job has a job. Bring health insurance to the remaining 40 million Americans. Pass criminal justice reform and get nonviolent offenders back to their families and jobs. End discrimination. and employment, housing, and adoption against our LGBT siblings. Put women on corporate boards and in the CEO jobs and watch how our business cultures change for the better. Expand the rights, care, and independence opportunities for those with physical, mental, and sensory disabilities. Pass a boldly expanded infrastructure bill and give our people skills, training for the jobs that actually exist. Keep abortion safe and legal, and birth control abundant and free. And fight all attacks on the new EPA Clean Power Plant regulations and the new Clean Water Rule. And strengthen the Endangered Species Act and save our wolves. William Maxwell wrote, "There's no haystack so large that the needle in it cannot be found. But it takes time, it takes humility, and a serious reason for searching." Now, we must take the time, we must have the humility to keep searching for the millions of small and large steps that lead to a better, to a more progressive world. Work, work, work. I love our new Pope Francis. It's a hard thing for a fallen Catholic to say. You know, he took his papal name from St. Francis, who said, "Preach the gospel always, and if necessary, use words."
Congressman Beyer. Wow, I'm inspired. Senator Bernie Sanders has represented Vermont as an independent in the Senate since 2007, after serving 16 years as the state's sole congressman in the House of Representatives. In 1991, Congressman Sanders co-founded the Congressional Progressive Caucus. As chairman of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, Sanders in 2014 passed legislation transforming the VA healthcare system. Senator Sanders is ranking member of the Senate Budget Committee. He also serves on the Environment and Public Works Committee, where he has focused on global warming and rebuilding our nation's crumbling infrastructure. He is a member of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, where he has supported efforts to transform our energy system from fossil fuels to renewable power sources like solar and wind. He also sits on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, where he has fought for greater access to affordable health care and improved education programs from pre-K to college. Throughout his career, Senator Sanders has been a champion for working families, focusing on the shrinking middle class and the growing gap between the rich and poor. And he's continuing his advocacy as a 2016 Democratic presidential candidate. It is my honor to introduce Senator Bernie Sanders.
Let me thank the Fairfax County Democrats for inviting me to be with you this evening. Let me congratulate Representative Beyer on his wonderful speech. Thank you very much. And Sandra, thank you very much for organizing this event. This country, as all of you know, faces some enormous problems. And some would argue that the problems we face, if you include climate change, might be more severe than any time since the Great Depression. And I want to discuss some of those issues tonight and some of the ideas that I think that can bring us forward. But before I do, I want to say a word about our friends in the Republican Party and what they stand for. And the main, I don't know if I want to use the word thesis and counter-thesis in Hegelian philosophy, but I think the main point that I want to make is if the American people actually knew what went on in the House of Representatives. If they actually knew what the budget passed by the Republican Congress was, I would think that millions of working class Republicans and middle class Republicans would understand that the Republican Party is not their party. And your job and my job is to do just that. And I intend to take this campaign all over the country into some conservative states and explain to working class Republicans that they should not continue to be voting for representatives who fight night and day for the billionaire class and are not representing their interests. Today, we learned that Jeb Bush's super PAC raised over $100 million in a few months. And this money is clearly coming from the wealthiest people in this country, which raises the profound issue of this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision. And the fact that Bush's donors, people like Sheldon Adelson, and most significantly the Koch brothers, their efforts are now undermining the foundations of American democracy, which mean to me that we must overturn this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision. The Koch brothers alone, it is estimated, will spend at least $900 million in this election cycle. That is more money than either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party will spend. Now, you tell me what it means when the second wealthiest family in America, a family that wants to abolish Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the EPA, the U.S. Postal Service, and virtually every piece of legislation passed to protect working people in the last 75 years, when one family can spend more money than either of the two major political parties. Brothers and sisters, that is not democracy, that is called oligarchy, and that is not And it is no accident that Jeb Bush and other Republican candidates who take huge amounts of money from the wealthy and the powerful come up with an agenda that represents the wealthy and the powerful. Yeah. As some of you may know, the American people work the longest hours of any people in the industrialized world. We work more than the Japanese, who are very hardworking, more than the British, and the French. Well, what can we say about the French? And yet, at a time when 85% of men who are working, 65% of women who are working, now work more than 40 hours a week, Jeb Bush thinks that's not enough, that working men and women need to work longer hours. Is it an accident that those ideas come from him after he receives all of this big money? The American people understand that all over our country, we have senior citizens who are trying to get by on $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 a year. And frankly, I do not understand how anybody in this day and age can survive on $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 a year. Jeb Bush and virtually all Republicans want to cut Social Security. And in fact, they want to move toward the privatization of Social Security. But here is the good news. As a result of the work done by many senior groups, by the trade union movement, and by millions of Americans, do you know what the American people are now saying? The American people are saying, no, we are not going to cut Social Security. We are going to expand Social Security. And in fact, a poll recently done by NBC Wall Street Journal said that by a 61% to 20%, the American people want to lift the cap and in fact extend and expand Social Security. Now the Koch brothers and many, many Republicans not only do not want to raise the minimum wage, Representative Beyer, you tell me if I'm right or wrong, but many of these guys want to end the concept of the minimum wage. All right? Which means that in high unemployment areas, they want people in America to work for $3, $4 an hour. That's what they want. But a few years ago, the SEIU and other unions started organizing low-wage fast food workers, and these very brave people, and I've been out on the streets with them. What they said, 7 1/4 is not a living wage. We've got to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And because of a strong grassroots movement all across this country, cities like Seattle, like Los Angeles, states all over the country began to raise the minimum wage. And in this very same poll, by a pretty good majority, the American people say not what is in the Senate, $10 an hour increase in the minimum wage. You know what the American people say? Raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Let's have a living wage. For several years now, many of us have been working with the White House, and our position was that we have millions of working people in this country who are making $25, $28 an hour, $28,000 a year, and they don't get any overtime. So you could be a quote-unquote manager at a McDonald's and make $25,000 a year. You could work 50, 60 hours a week, and you don't get time and a half, because the Fair Labor Standards Act have not been changed in decades. And we worked with the White House, and just last week, the President did exactly the right thing. Jeb Bush and the Republicans think this is a terrible idea. Why would you want to change a situation where somebody making $25,000 a year, working 60 hours a week, could get overtime? What a terrible idea. But we made that happen. My point is that on issue after issue, when you bring them out into the open, you find that the Republican Party is literally a fringe party whose views are so out of touch with the American people. Now, Representative Beyer knows about the Republican budget that passed a couple of months ago. I'm the ranking member of the Budget Committee, as Sandra mentioned. How many Americans understand that the Republican budget threw 27 million people off the budget? Now, I want to see the United States join the rest of the industrialized world, where we guarantee health care to all people as a right. toward a Medicare for all single-payer system. Now, the Affordable Care Act has done a lot of good things, but we still have 35 million Americans with zero insurance, and we have even more who are underinsured with large copayments and large deductibles. The Republican solution to that problem was to throw 27 million more Americans off of health insurance. And being the ranking member of the committee, I had the opportunity to ask my Republican colleagues, what happens to these 27 million? How many of them will die? Surely thousands. How many of them will end up much sicker than they should have been because they're unable to go to a doctor or get into the hospital? And you know what the Republican response is? Nothing. They've got nothing to say because they fully hope and expect that nobody in America, or very few people in America, will understand what they're doing. Now, all of you know that one of the crises that we face in this country is that we live in a highly competitive global economy. And if we are going to succeed, clearly we need the best educated workforce in the world. Everybody knows that. And yet we are living at a moment in which hundreds of thousands of bright, qualified young people who dream about going to college are unable to do so because their family lacks the money. Now that is not only grossly unfair to those low-income and working-class kids who want nothing more to be able to make it into the middle class, but it is absolutely absurd if we talk about the future of our country and the need for a strong economy. What sense is it to tell hundreds of thousands of bright young people, we don't want you to be scientists or engineers or nurses or doctors or teachers or police officers. We don't want you to develop your intellectual capabilities. That is totally absurd and counterproductive to everything this nation should be doing. And that is why you want a progressive idea. Here's a progressive idea. We're going to make public colleges and universities in America tuition free. This not only benefits young people in high school, gee, now I can go to college, that's great. It goes much deeper than that, and I'll tell you why. We have the highest rate, shamefully, of poverty of any major industrialized country on earth. We have, and I do, very often, over half of the children in America in public schools are so low income they're now on free or reduced lunch programs. But when you say to those kids that if you study hard, if you do your homework, yes, your parents didn't go to college. Yes, the people in your neighborhood, by and large, did not go to college. But if you study hard and take school seriously, guess what? You will have that opportunity to get a higher education and make it into the middle class. And that will revolutionize education from first grade throughout. But that is not what our Republican colleagues believe. We are listening to working families all over this country. And they say to us, how does it happen that Germany and Scandinavia, now Chile, have tuition-free higher education? How does it happen that 50 years ago in the United States of America, our great public universities and colleges were free and now they are unaffordable? Our job is to think big, not small. And our job is to say that every person in this country, not just young people, but people who want to improve their lives, get more education, should be able to do so as a right. we talk about the absurdity of how we finance higher education in America, let me touch on another issue. There are millions of people in this country, some young, some not so young, who are being crushed by the oppressive burden of student debt. Now, once again, what sense is it that we are telling people, yes, you can get an education, but you're going to have to pay 20–25% of your income, which in some cases may not be a lot of money, paying back your debt. That you're not going to be able to get married and have a kid. That you're not going to be able to own a car or own your own home. Last year I met with some folks in Burlington, Vermont. There was a woman there whose dream in life was to become a medical doctor and do primary health care with low-income people, which is exactly what we need in this nation. And her crime, her punishment for becoming a doctor was coming out of school $300,000 in debt. And I thought that that was really quite unbelievable. I was in Iowa recently, for reasons you may guess as to why. And I mentioned that, and a young woman comes up, just $300,000. I just graduated dental school, I'm $400,000 in debt. What we need to do is to understand that it is absurd that today, you and my family, has refinanced our home at 2 or 3% interest rates. Now, how in God's name do we have a situation where you can refinance your home with 2 or 3% interest rates? You can go out and buy a car today at 0 or 1% interest rates. We got millions of people stuck with 6, 8, 10% interest rates. Young man in the back of the room works with me. What is it, Jeff, 9%? 9%. His crime was to go to law school. 9% interest rates. So what we are going to do is to allow people who have student debt to refinance that debt at lower interest rates. We're going to do is get the government out of the business of profiteering off of working class families who want to send their kids to college. You do that, you can substantially lower interest rates on student debt. Now people say, well, Bernie, that sounds like a great idea. It is expensive. Isn't it expensive? And the answer is, yeah, it is expensive. It's about $70 billion a year. It's a lot of money. How are we going to pay for it? You know how we're going to pay for it? We're going to pay for it by a tax on Wall Street speculation. It's a result of the greed, recklessness, and illegal behavior of people on Wall Street. This country was plunged into the worst recession since the Great Depression. Millions of people lost their jobs, lost their homes, lost their life savings. Well, Wall Street is doing just great now. The largest banks are larger than they were before we bailed them out. I think it's time to tell them that after we bailed them out, it's time for them to help bailing out the middle class. When we talk about America's economy today, there are a few points that I think need to be made. Number one, we have more income and wealth inequality in America today than we've had since 1928, and it is worse than in any other major country on earth. And we have to lay this issue boldly right on the table. And we have to ask ourselves whether it is moral. I know moral and politics do not necessarily go together. But I think we need to inject some of this issue. And the congressman is right in talking about Pope Francis, who is doing an extraordinary job in this. Is it moral, is it right, that today in America, the top 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%? I don't think it is. And we got to lay that on the table. Is it sustainable, economically sustainable, that we have almost all of the new income generated going to the top 1%? Is it appropriate that in recent years we have seen a proliferation of millionaires and billionaires at the same time as millions of Americans are working longer hours for lower wages, and we have millions of kids who do not have the nutrition that they need? So I think we got to think big here, and we have to say loudly and clearly, we are going to create an economy that works for working families and the middle class, not the millionaires and not the billionaires. What we are going to say is that real unemployment, now, you got official unemployment statistics come out every month. They're going down. Last official unemployment rate was 5.3%, much lower than it used to be. But official unemployment is not real unemployment, because it doesn't include those people who've given up looking for work and those millions of people who are working part-time when they want to work full-time. Add that together, what the government tells us is that real unemployment is about 10.5%. Millions of people need work. And then I want to tell you something that almost nobody is talking about, and we have got to raise this issue to the sky. And that is the tragedy of youth unemployment in America. Hardly ever talked about. The Economic Policy Institute, one of the important progressive think tanks in this country, recently came out with a report, and this is what they said. Listen to this. They said for kids between 17 and 20 who either graduated high school or dropped out of high school, if they were white, their unemployment rate was 33%. If they were Hispanic, their unemployment rate was 36%. If they were African American, the unemployment rate was 51%. And this is an issue that we don't even talk about, let alone seriously try to address. And what happens? What happens, among other things, is that when you have millions of young people, about 5.5 million in America, who have no jobs, who are not in school, bad things happen. And it is no coincidence that today we have more people in jail by far than any other country on earth. China is a communist, authoritarian country, 3-4 times our population. We have more people in jail than China. It seems to me kind of commonsensical that instead of locking up hundreds and hundreds of thousands of young people, maybe we invest in education and jobs rather than in jails. And when you think about what jails do, people who are arrested for marijuana use and everything else, these lives are being destroyed. Because these arrest records are there, following them around for their lives, very hard to get jobs, and a bad situation becomes much worse. But when we talk about the economy, it is also important to understand that it's not just income and wealth inequality which we have to deal with, and it's not only high unemployment we have to deal with. It is the fact that millions of Americans are working at horrendously low wages, period. And what that means is it is imperative that we raise this minimum wage to a living wage so that nobody in America who works 40 hours a week lives in poverty. And it also means, very importantly, that we establish pay equity in this country for women workers. women should not be making 78 cents on the dollar compared to men. Now, when I talk about my Republican colleagues, we hear many of them going around the country talking about family values. They just love families. Well, I've got 4 kids, great kids, and I got 7 grandchildren. Been married for 27 years. I am very strongly pro-family, but my view of pro-family is a little bit different than theirs. When Republicans talk about family values, this is what they mean. They are telling us that women in America should not have the right to control their own bodies. I disagree. They are telling us that women are not intelligent enough to know what contraceptives they might wish to purchase. I disagree. And they are telling us that gay couples should not have the same rights as straight couples and be able to get married. I strongly disagree. Now that is their view of family values. What in fact is an agenda, a proposal that really meets the needs of American families? Let me just suggest a few ideas. Number one, not only are we the only major nation on earth that doesn't guarantee health care to all people as a right, we are also the only major country that doesn't provide family medical leave. You want to hear a family value? A family value is that when a mom has a baby, regardless of her income, she should be able to stay home for 12 weeks with pay. That's a family value. It is a family value that every worker in America should be guaranteed at least 7 days of paid sick pay. Given the fact that Americans work the longest hours of any other people in a major country, and given the fact that there are jobs out there now which provide 0 vacation pay, every family in America should get at least 2 weeks of paid vacation. Let me conclude by touching on an issue which Pope Francis recently spoke about in his encyclical, and that all of us know is a huge planetary crisis. When we look at ourselves as adults and as parents, I think there is nothing more important than making certain that we leave this planet to our kids and our grandchildren in a way that is habitable. The debate is over. Maybe not on Fox TV, but other than that, the debate is over, and the scientific community is almost unanimous in stating climate change is real. Climate change is caused by human activity. Climate change is already causing devastating problems in the United States and throughout the world. And what the scientists tell us is that we have a reasonably short window of opportunity to transform our energy system, to move away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. Short window of opportunity. And what they tell us is if we don't take that opportunity, by the end of this century, the planet Earth will be between 5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. And what that means is more drought, more floods, more extreme weather disturbances, more acidification of the ocean. And what the CIA and the Department of Defense tell us, it means there will be more global conflict because the people around the world do not have the water they need. They don't have the land they need to grow their crops. They're going to migrate into other people's territory, causing international conflict. In my view, the United States should lead the world in transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energies like wind, solar, geothermal. We can do this. We have the technology now. It will only get better in the future. See, Sandra's getting nervous, so I'm going to conclude. But I want to say this. What the Republican worldview is a worldview way out of touch with where the American people are. It is a worldview shaped by the fact that the billionaire class and the wealthiest people in this country are strongly supporting them. And they do the bidding of the billionaire class. Our job, and I beg this of you, is not to fall into the trap where the liberal position is to cut education only by 2% as opposed to the Republicans wanting to cut it by 8%. That should not be our worldview. Our worldview should be to ask, why not? Why can we not live in a country, as is the case of every other major country, where health care is a right of all people? Why not? Why can we not live in a country where working families have quality and affordable child care and every American can go to college regardless of his or her income? Why in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, where in the last 30 years there has been a huge transfer of wealth from the middle class to the top 0.1%, why should not every senior citizen in this country be allowed to retire with security and dignity? After sending our young men and women to Iraq and Afghanistan, and I'm proud to tell you I voted against that war in Iraq. Why are there people talking about cutting veterans' benefit when we should make sure that all of our veterans get the benefits of the health care that they need? We have made progress in recent years, and we should be very proud of this, in overcoming a lot of discrimination in America. We have a long way to go, but we have made progress in terms of combating racism, sexism, homophobia, and a lot of other discriminatory practices. But there is one area where not only where we have not made progress, we are losing ground, and that is the economic struggle. I believe, from the bottom of my heart, that if we stand together, if we increase the voter turnout so that we don't have 63% of the people not voting, as was the case last November, but if we can motivate young people and working people to stand up and say loudly and clearly, this nation belongs to all of us, not just a handful. Government must represent all of us and not big donors. If we can do that, there is nothing that we cannot accomplish. Thank you all very much.
I see there are a few questions. Yeah, I know. When you get there, when I ask you for your question, please state your name, and then to maximize the number of people that get a chance at the mic, please don't make a speech. We don't need a manifesto. Just ask a question. Okay? In fact, I have a goal. Try to get your question asked in 30 seconds if you can, okay? And please specify who you would like to answer it. Yeah. All right. All right. And then the last thing I want to say about this before we begin is this is a policy forum. It's not a campaign event. So please confine your questions to policy issues. Okay, tape ready, mics in place. Let's start there. Let's get started.
My question is addressed to Senator Sanders. I'm James Trout. I am a person on the autism spectrum, and I work for Respectability, a disability rights and employment organization based in Bethesda. And my question for you is as follows. There are 56 million people in the world, in this country with disabilities, and 70% of people with disabilities are unemployed and not able to, but want to generally be able to find work. What initiatives, Senator Sanders, would President Sanders support and advocate? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. You know, he's sitting down. All right. You know, work is part of what being human is about. And whether you have a disability or you don't, the horrors of unemployment really, and I was there once. I'm not having a job, not being part of the community, being isolated, feeling worthless, strikes deep. So we have to establish a full employment program for all our people with disabilities and with non-disabilities. But I want to tell you something else. The immediate concern that we have is, I'm sure Congressman Beyer is more than aware of, is what our Republican colleagues are doing are playing games with the Social Security system. And they, historically, what has happened is when either the retirement part of Social Security or the disability part ran out of money, it was no big deal. It was not a political deal. You switch money from one fund to the other. They are threatening not to do that, which would mean, as I recall it, a 19% cut. Now, I don't know how people are going to survive on a 19% cut, so we're going to do our best to defeat that proposal. And I want all of you to understand that when you hear our Republican colleagues talk about Social Security going broke, they are not telling you the truth. There's $2.5 trillion in the trust fund, can pay out all benefits for the next 18 years, but that's an issue we have to talk about. But thank you very much for your question.
May I ask for a second, the people asking questions, get close to the mic and talk loud. It helps me with the recording.
Thanks, Jim. I'd love to hear your answer to that, please.
I heartily agree, but I think we start with Senator Sanders' commitment to a full employment program. You know, we've had, for years and years, we've had the Independence Center here in Arlington, Virginia, started back in 1980. And it's really understanding the full range of what it takes to put a person that has a disability back to work. It's not just a job, it's all the support services that come with it too. And last I checked, we had a 10,000 person backlog for independent housing for people with disabilities in this. So we need to address housing, we need to address support services, and we need to make sure that there's a supported employment job that people can do.
Great, thank you. Yes.
Paul Friedman from Alexandria, Virginia. I'm honored to be here. This issue I'd like both speakers to address, and honored to have you both here. It relates to trade and the role trade plays in rebuilding American jobs. So we know there's a big difference between international trade and some of the trade agreements that we have been signing over the many years, maybe over the last 25 years. I think we know where Senator Sanders stands on some of those trade agreements. My question is, would you, if you had the opportunity, reopen any of those trade agreements, renegotiate them, or have America leave them? And would you consider renewing in any way the use of tariffs as a way to approach our international trade? Most importantly, the question here is, international trade and these trade agreements, do they bring jobs? Do they enhance our society? How can we help rebuild the middle class? I'd love to hear both speakers on this. Thank you very much.
Let me take a shot at that. You're looking at a senator and a former congressman who voted against NAFTA, CAFTA, and permanent normal trade relations with China, and who is helping to lead the opposition against the TPP. You know, there are, on this issue, I strongly disagree with the president. And to me, the evidence is pretty overwhelming, that these trade agreements were written by corporate America with the express design of allowing them to shut down plants in America and move abroad and hire people there at very, very low wages, and then bring their products back into this country. Since 2001, we have lost some 60,000 factories and millions of decent paying jobs. Not all of it can be attributed to trade, but I believe a lot of it can. I think that what we need is a trade agreement that works for the middle class and for poor people around the world, and not a trade agreement that simply works for corporate America and the CEOs. And your point about bringing back tariffs, absolutely. Do I think that some corporation should be able to shut down in America, move abroad, and bring their products back in this country, tariff-free? No, I don't. So I think that we should renegotiate and rethink our entire trade policy. I do not believe that we're going to be able to rebuild the crumbling middle class unless we do that.
I agree with much of what Senator Sanders has to say, that we clearly need, not all of it, we clearly need trade policies that rebuild the middle class. However, I did support and do support the President's trade policy. I believe... Quiet.
Come on,
I
civility,
believe that this
please.
president, I believe that this president, who has done so much over the last 6.5 years to move this country in a very progressive direction, also believes that this will move the country. He argues that this will be the most progressive trade agreement in American history. It will have the highest labor and environmental standards ever that are enforceable. I mean, it will fix many of the things that were wrong with NAFTA and with CAFTA. By the way, much of the argument on the Hill was that we needed no trade promotion authority, that we needed to give the Congress the ability to tune up the TPP when it comes back. I serve with those 245 Republicans every day. The last thing we want is John Boehner and the Tea Party fixing the trade agreement that comes to us overseas. We have trade agreements with 20 countries in the world, and we have trade surpluses with 19 of those 20 countries. China is where those jobs went. China is not part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So I have not made a total position on TPP yet because, like you, I want to read it. But we'll have 5 months to read it, and then we can do our best to make the right decision. But clearly what we want to do is make sure that trade is growing jobs here. We want to be able to build products here and sell them overseas. We already have the lowest tariffs in the world. We need to tear down the tariffs of those countries that we're selling to.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, please, your question.
Hello, Senator, thank you so much for being here. But my question is actually for the Congressman because I already know where you stand on most issues. And Congressman Beyer, it is also on trade and also just money and politics issues in general. Do you feel that the money that you raised in your recent congressional campaign and the vast sums of money that you raised for the DCCC and for Hillary Clinton and her affiliated super PACs had influenced your vote for TPA with the minority of Democrats, and how do you think that's going to influence you going forward as an endorsee of, or as an endorser for Hillary Clinton when it comes to you making a decision on TPP?
That seems like a loaded question, but let me tell you. Let me tell you from the bottom of my heart, I have never cast a vote based on any dollars that I've been given or any dollars that I've raised, and I never will. And by the way, if you look at the money that I raised, you know, $100 and $500 at a time last year, almost none of it, I can't think of any of it, that was given to me by people who gave it to me because of a trade position or people that had a vested interest in trade. And I've not raised any money for Hillary Clinton this year. It was Barack Obama that I was Mid-Atlantic Finance Chairman for, and before that, Howard Deans.
Okay, next question on this side.
Yes, David Tate and I volunteer for a group called Results. And my question relates to the Earned Income Tax Credit, which has been one of the most successful anti-poverty programs. And has often been voted in on a bipartisan basis. But anytime it comes up now in the Senate to improve or make permanent past improvements, which expire in 2017, it goes nowhere, despite the fact that corporate tax extenders almost became permanent only because of the threat of Obama's veto. I'm just wondering, both speakers, why is it that there's this disparity in terms of support for corporate tax, but not for tax breaks that help working families?
Come on, you know the answer to that. Look, you know, the answer is pretty obvious. You have a Republican majority whose function in life is to represent the wealthy. Let me give you an example. In the budget resolution, after cutting education and nutrition and health care and not extending the added benefits that we put into the children's tax credit or the earned income tax credit, doing away with those. So in other words, raising taxes on low income and moderate income people. Do you know what the Republicans did in that same budget resolution? They provided $250 billion in tax breaks for the top 0.2%. You know, we got to stop being nice about this issue. How does it happen? Well, how do you think it happens? What do you think the big money is paying for? They're paying for more tax breaks for the rich. They're paying for the deregulation of Wall Street. Wall Street spent billions and billions of dollars to get deregulated. That's why Bush is raising $100 million in the first few months from the wealthiest people in this country. So that's the answer. Don't be naive about it. That is why the rich get richer and why virtually every piece of legislation that gets onto the floor of the House is paid for. Is that right? The American people want to raise the minimum wage. The Republicans lower taxes for billionaires. How does that happen? Because the billionaires pay them to do that.
And just one structural thing about the Congress is fascinating. I learned it in the last 6 months. When we want to make an additional investment in child care, in health care, in research and development, we have to find something else to cut. But it has to be what they call a pay for. But when Republicans want to cut taxes, there's no pay for.
Okay, moving on. Yes, please, your name and your question, please.
Hi, my name is Liz Runyon. I'm a volunteer for People for Bernie. My question is for Senator Sanders. Last fall, I got sick, and I had to leave my job for a little while, but my employer said that FMLA did not apply to me, and they completely stopped paying for health care and replaced me because and I've been there for like 4 years. What I want to know is, what would you do to change that? Because small business will fight back against them having to pay for, you know, things. Okay.
Got it. Here's the irony. With the United States being the only major country on earth that doesn't guarantee health care to all people, this ironically becomes a burden on small and medium-sized businesses. Right? So you have the absurd situation now of businesses maybe producing the same product or providing the same service. One of them does the decent thing and provides good health care for their workers. The other one doesn't. What sense is that? You have small businesses all over the country spending enormous amounts of time and energy trying to figure out what is the cost-effective way to provide health care to all people. Well, you know what? Let me give you the radical thought here. Your employer should not be providing health care to you. It should be a right of all Americans to a national health care program.
Yes.
I'm Harvey Berlin of Arlington County, and Senator Sanders, would you please discuss your support for reauthorization of the Surface Transportation Act to improve and modernize and repair the nation's highways and mass transit systems, and your thoughts about how to finance that legislation in light of the limited funds available currently in the current trust fund? Thank you.
Well, I'm on the committee. It's chaired by Senator Jim Inhofe. one of the more conservative members. But actually, amazingly, on this issue, he is certainly a lot better than he is on climate change. And I am supportive of the efforts, and right now, there will be a bill, I think, fairly soon passing the Senate, probably with strong bipartisan support, came out of, I think, the committee unanimously. Here's the issue, and this is, again, talks about the absurdities of what goes on in America today. We have millions of people unemployed, and everybody knows that our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, airports, our rail system, way behind Europe and many other countries, all of them are in pretty bad shape. The American Society of Civil Engineers tells us we need to invest $3 trillion, over $3 trillion, to put us in reasonable shape. I have introduced legislation that would put $1 trillion into infrastructure in the next 5 years. You know what it would do? It would create at least 13 million jobs and rebuild our infrastructure. So the good news is that in a dysfunctional Congress, it appears finally that we may make a little bit of progress on the highway bill. But let me be honest with you, it doesn't go anywhere near as far as it should.
Thank you. Okay, next question, please.
Hi, my name is Tyler Fisher, and my question is, Greece, which by many accounts is the most progressive country in Europe, has just defaulted on $1.7 billion. How does your policy agenda, which increases spending in numerous areas, address the budget deficit and also $18 trillion in debt, 75% of which is owed to middle-class, hardworking Americans? And then perhaps the larger question is, if we really want to get money out of politics, shouldn't we try to get politics out of money?
Ooh. Cute phrase.
Explain it. Right, if politics can make education free, and if politics can make retirement free, and if politics can make healthcare free, what if politics couldn't do those things, do you think money would really be spent on politics?
Not quite sure I got it all, but let me tell you what I think. We have an $18 trillion debt. You're right. It's a lot of money. One of the questions, and I think the congressman touched on it in another context, is how do we get that debt? When Clinton left office, in fact, we were running a pretty heavy surplus. And the projection was, in fact, that we were looking at greater and greater surpluses in the years to come. Now, and the congressman made this point. It's a good point. Republicans are very kind of interesting about how they deal with deficit. You see, they're very worried about the deficit, which is why they want to slash Medicare and Medicaid and education and all these programs. They're very worried about the deficit. Yet today, just today, they voted for another $38 billion for the military. You know how they paid for it? They didn't. They didn't. They put it on the credit card. Republicans took us into war in Iraq and Afghanistan, forgetting the policy issues involved there. How did they pay for that war? Oh, they forgot to pay for it. Too busy worrying about cutting Medicaid and nutrition programs for children. Just forgot to pay for those wars, which will end up costing us $4 to $6 trillion. Republicans stay up nights worrying about the deficit. That is why in their budget resolution, they provided $250 billion over a 10-year period in tax breaks for the top 0.2%. All right, that's true. All right, so you ask a question: is the deficit, is the national debt serious? First point is, in the last 6.5, 7 years, we have cut the deficit by 2/3. When Bush left office, it was 1.4 trillion. Now is what, 450 billion, somewhere around there? All right, not enough, but pretty good progress. Second point, when you look at issues like the deficit or the national debt, they cannot be looked at without seeing them in a broader context. And the broader context is in the last 30 years, there has been a transfer of wealth in this country to the tune of many trillions of dollars, going from the middle class to the top 1/10 of 1%. Top 1/10 of 1% now owns 20% of the wealth in America. 1985, they owned 10%. Middle class share has shrunk. So you want to know how you deal with the deficit? You say boldly and frankly, that the wealthy and large corporations will have to pay more in taxes.
Congressman Beyer, would you please give your
I have
opinion?
a little add to the senator's excellent answer, but two quick things. My friend Tim Kaine has said that he thinks the biggest difference between Democrats and Republicans is the Republicans want to limit who gets to vote, and Democrats want to expand who gets to vote. But I think there's a second one that I see every day on Capitol Hill, and that is in dealing with the deficit that all of us appreciate is real. And all of us have to acknowledge we don't want to put our children and grandchildren in debt. The Republican idea is to cut and cut and cut the things that make us strong. We have seen all throughout Europe that austerity does not work. On the other hand, and the Democratic perspective is we want to invest, invest, invest. Invest in children, invest in education, invest in our infrastructure, invest in healthcare, invest in the things that will allow us to grow much more quickly and make that budget deficit come down naturally based on the strengths that we have.
Thank you.
And on getting the money out of politics?
I'm sorry, you've had your turn. We're going to someone else now. Okay, please.
Hi, my name is Honora Laszlo, and I'm with the Arlington chapter of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. And I would like to ask Senator Sanders if he could please clarify a couple of statements that he made. I have been a supporter of his since I became aware of his existence, pretty much. And I, along with many other people in the gun violence prevention community, were very wholeheartedly looking forward to support you. I'd like to ask you about two things. One is you said shortly after the Sandy Hook shooting that you don't think any kind of gun legislation would prevent tragedies like that. And the other thing was in the recent Rolling Stone profile, you said that you understand that some people think guns are bad, some people don't like guns, but that there are a lot of law-abiding gun owners in this country and we need to have a conversation. And we would like to make the point that the conversation is not about whether guns are bad or good. It's about guns as a public safety issue and the fact that women in a house with a gun are 6 times more likely to...
Is there a question coming?
There is a question. I'd like him to clarify his statements, and I'd like to know what his policy would be around gun reform.
Okay.
Thank you. I come from a state that has virtually no gun control, and is, turns out, one of the safest states in the country. I come from a state where tens and tens of thousands of people hunt and do target practice. I understand that guns in my state are different than guns in Chicago or Los Angeles. I understand, and the people of my state understand, that there are people all over this country who have guns, who should not have guns, who are killing other people. I understand that. And that is why I cast some very, very difficult votes. I voted to support the ban on assault weapons.
With all due respect, Senator, you also,
Pardon me?
You also cast the vote to allow gun manufacturers not to ever be sued.
Let him
That's
explain.
Right. I did. Okay? But here's the point, and I'm glad you asked the question. Let me tell you what else I also voted. I also voted for an instant background check, which means that if somebody has a criminal background, somebody is a domestic abuser, that person will not get a gun. Cast that vote. And I voted for legislation that closes the loophole that now exists through gun shows. Okay? Those are major pieces of legislation. Now, let me throw it back to you. We can argue all that we want between Vermont and Montana and urban America about guns. We are not going to succeed. What we need is a gun policy. It may not be your policy. But if you want to succeed, we have got to overcome the cultural divide. People in urban America have got to appreciate, and I said this and let me repeat it, that the overwhelming majority of people who hunt know about guns and respect guns and are law-abiding people. That's the truth. And people in rural America have got to understand that in urban areas, guns mean something very, very different. And therefore we can continue this argument for decades. And I know that maybe there are people in this room who say, let's ban all guns in America, or whatever it may be, okay? But if we are going to succeed and get beyond the arguments that have gone on decade after decade, you need some common sense solution. I am open to any ideas that make sense, but I will tell you, I have voted in a very difficult vote to ban assault weapons. I voted to close the gun control loophole, and I voted for instant background checks, and I'm open to other ideas. But we will not succeed on this terribly important issue if we continue the cultural warfare between urban America and rural America. And I think I'm in a good place to try to bridge that.
You said you were going to throw it back to me, though. Could I have one more
All right, this Amtrak thing. Let me tell you about this Amtrak thing. It's a very good example. Yeah, I voted. Oh, the gun thing, the gun manufacturers. Yeah, you know what? Yes, you're right. That's how I voted. Why did I vote that way? Because if somebody has a gun and somebody steals that gun and they shoot somebody, do you really think it makes sense to blame the manufacturer of that weapon?
Yes, and I'll tell you why.
No,
because
you could tell me. I don't.
Smart gun
come on,
technology that would prevent.
We would like other people to get a chance.
The point is that I made, if somebody sells you a baseball bat and you hit somebody over the head, you're not going to sue the baseball bat manufacturer. But this becomes an issue. See, I don't want to argue this all night, but this is exactly what I'm talking about. There has got to be some give on both sides. In my state, you know what people would say to you? They would say, what do you have against me? What have I ever done wrong? Because I've taken my kids into the woods and gone hunting. We haven't done anything wrong. But there's going to have to be some compromises on both sides. So I don't apologize for that vote.
Okay, let's move on. All right, I'd like to move on, and I'm going to take the prerogative as the moderator to ask a question. We've spent a lot of time on domestic policy. I'd like to shift focus. Published yesterday in a Foreign Affairs magazine snapshot article entitled Principles for a Progressive Foreign Policy, the authors asserted that a fundamentally reordered world demands that the United States rethink its foreign policy toolbook, and they recommended a set of principles to guide U.S. foreign policy and Congress's foreign policy agenda. Among these principles, they proposed that the United States needs a new Marshall Plan for at-risk regions, that the United States is strongest when it works with partners and allies, that covert actions such as mass surveillance and large-scale CIA lethal operations must be constrained, and that climate change presents an immediate threat to the world, and the United States must rigorously address this crisis. Beginning with Congressman Beyer and then Senator Sanders, what do you think about these recommendations, and what do you believe should be the basic tenets of a progressive U.S. foreign policy strategy?
I like it very much. I'm not going to repeat it, but it's a very good structure. I think we first need to recognize that the greatest existential crisis of our generation and probably of our century is climate change. So that has to be the first thing that we address. Second is I'm very much an internationalist. I think the president said very well, none of the problems that we face, ISIS, Russia, climate change, et cetera, begin or end at the American border. So we need to bring the world together as best we can in a collaborative way to deal with all these issues. I also think that diplomacy is almost always better than war. That when the first bullet flies or the first bomb is dropped, we never know what's going to happen, except we do know that an enormous number of innocent civilians on both sides are going to be killed. And I think that we've made enormous progress with the United Nations, with American leadership, but we need to continue to be humble and outreach and work with the rest of the world.
Thank you. Senator?
Well, I agree with what the congressman said. I would add a few points, and it's implicit in those sets of principles. Wouldn't it be great if all over the world the poorest people on earth knew that we were on their side, that we were standing with them? I have been around the world, and I've seen some of the great things that we've done. I was in Egypt years ago, and we were giving out, the AID people were giving out small checks to women who were using their checks to buy a sewing machine. to make a living. And that was pretty revolutionary in their lives. We have done some great, great things around the world. Specifically, I would say, let me add something to that. Obviously, everybody is concerned about the barbarism of ISIS and so forth, and the need to defeat ISIS. But I get very, very nervous hearing some of my Republican colleagues forgetting about the lessons of Afghanistan, forgetting about the lessons of Iraq. And they're talking, they just can't count the wars they're anxious to get into. Ready to go to war in Iran, ready to go to war in Syria, ready to go to war in Iraq again. I think, and I think what the congressman said is right, essentially what we need to do is coalition, putting together large coalitions. It cannot be just the United States of America. And specifically in the Middle East, I found it pathetic that you had the Saudi Arabian government requesting American troops, combat troops on the ground. Saudi Arabia has the third largest military budget in the world. When their new leader came into power, he was giving out billions of dollars to gain support from his people. Well, you know what? Maybe they should put their troops out on the ground to defend themselves before asking for American troops.
Okay, of course, we know Q&A is never long enough. I'm going to take two more questions, one here, and then we have to wrap up. So let's start here, please.
Hi, Emil George from Fairfax County. Mr. Sanders, first of all, thank you for your support of single-payer health care, not only today, but for the past decades. Thank you. One of my biggest concerns about it, though, is how are we going to fight back against the inevitable millions on millions of cash we're going to see coming in from insurance companies and big pharma companies trying to fight back against this?
Thank you. It won't be millions of dollars. It will be hundreds of millions of dollars. The United States is not only the only country on earth that doesn't guarantee health care to all of its people, but it is the only country that allows private insurance companies to play a major role. And the function to a large degree of our healthcare system today is not to provide quality, cost-effective healthcare, but to make money for the private insurance companies and for the drug companies who charge us the highest prices in the world. It's a huge issue unto itself. Now, how do we combat that? The answer is, it's how we transform America. And I don't want to be political here, because I understand this is not a political, no, I mean that. I mean that. I do mean it. We will not win when 63% of the people do not vote.
Yes.
But our job is to build a strong, grassroots, progressive movement. Yes. And when you have that, and when you say that the government of this great country has got to represent all of us and not a handful of people on the top, and when you have a progressive agenda which includes single payer, then we transform America. But we don't have single payer. You don't have real tax reform. You don't have action on climate change. You don't have action to protect our kids unless we do that. So anyone who says, I want to do this, that, and the other thing, without helping to build a strong grassroots movement, is not making sense. All right? So we've got to be politically active and develop that movement.
Thank you. Okay, last question, please.
My question is my name is Martin McSherry. My question is for Senator Sanders and Congressman Beyer. You talk about getting money out of politics, overturning Citizens United. It really is the most important issue of our time because it directly affects every single other issue. How do we do it? Let's say you're not the president. Let's say you are. Does it take a constitutional amendment? Is that a convention? Does the Senate have to do that? What are our policy options?
I will be political for a moment.
You can be political.
You're right, and thank you. Your first name is?
My name is Martin.
Martin. He's right. We talked about single payer. You talk about climate change. You talk about education. You talk about jobs. You are talking about campaign finance reform. Now, what I will do if elected president, and I've said this publicly before, is there will be a litmus test for those people I nominate to the Supreme Court. Because this issue is so important, that litmus test will be that person will vote to overturn Citizens United. That's the fastest way to do it. Second of all, what you need, which could be a palliative, could help a little bit, is we need a disclosure act, which says that if the Koch brothers want to put hundreds of millions of dollars of ugly 30-second ads on, their pretty faces are going to be on the TV screen saying that they approve of those ads. The long process, which people have begun, and I've helped introduce the constitutional amendment, is the constitutional amendment process. Fourth point that I would make, longer term, I absolutely believe that not only do we have to overturn Citizens United, we need public funding of elections.
Congressman Beyer, I know you have something to say on this too.
Well, I agree with everything the senator said, and I'm proud also to be a co-sponsor of the legislation to create that constitutional amendment to change Citizens United, to recognize that corporations are not people. There should be no dark money. And let me just point out, a little whimsically, I served 4 years in Switzerland, where political advertising on television and radio is illegal.
Okay, we're going to wrap up now, but I want to ask both speakers if they'd like to make any final remarks before I close.
Sounds like a debate, but that's what I usually do in these debates. You got 30 seconds to make your point. All right. Well, let me just thank all of you.
I'm never going to cut you off, you know this.
Let me thank all of you for coming out. I've enjoyed the opportunity of meeting Sandra and Congressman Beyer. Look, this country, and you've heard it tonight, we face enormous problems. No ifs, buts, and maybes. But let me conclude on this note. I often tell this story. It's a true story. I was up in northern Vermont, right near the Canadian border. And there was an event to honor World War II veterans. It was a wonderful event. It was a great event. And before the event began, a young lady who was the daughter of one of the participants showed a video. This was the video. The video was of Franklin D. Roosevelt on December 8th, 1941. You all remember that? And what that day was the day that the United States declared war against Japan. It was the day after Pearl Harbor, and a few weeks later we were at war against Germany. On that day, the United States was totally unprepared to fight one war in the East, let alone another war in Europe. Totally unprepared. Our military was not strong. We were certainly not producing the tanks, the guns, the planes that we needed. In 2.5 years, war ended in 45. In 2.5 years, that war was essentially won. We had the best military in the world. We were producing huge amounts of planes, tanks, guns, etc. Point being is that when we as a nation focus on issues, there is nothing that we can accomplish. Can we provide health care to all people? Of course we can. Can we lead the world in fighting climate change? Of course we can. Can we have the best educational system in the world, making sure that our kids can afford to go to college? Absolutely. We can do it. But we cannot do it unless we have a political revolution in this country, when millions of people begin to stand together and to take on this billionaire class, which now has so much power.
Well, there are some closing remarks, so I'll make them fast. I want to draw from recent comments by journalist and political commentator Bill Moyers. The progressive agenda is America's story. And at their core, the New Deal, the Fair Deal, the Great Society programs all constituted a progressive policy agenda aimed at assuring every child of a decent education, every worker a decent wage, and every senior a decent retirement. We need leaders like Senator Sanders and Congressman Beyer to continue this progressive American story, to champion the rising populist electorate, challenge the oligarchic forces, and lead a movement to reboot our policy agenda and reclaim the American dream for all of us. Thank you, Congressman Beyer, Senator Sanders, audience, for a great discussion. Thank you for coming.